of classic film talkbacks. I'm Norma Levy, president of New Plaza. We're a nonprofit showing independent and foreign films and providing information, talkbacks and lectures on classic cinema. Today's film is a quirky 1980 film selected by our curator, Gary Palmucci. It's called The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole and Barbara Hershey. Gary will, as usual, be joined by his good friend, Max Alvarez, the noted film historian. I hope you enjoy the talkback, and it's my great pleasure now to turn this over to Gary.
Thank you very much, Norma, and good afternoon, everyone. So as a sequel to Max's spectacular survey of movie stunts, we followed an unusual path to this weekend's film. My first thought was to find something appropriate with thoroughly accomplished filmmaking and terrific stunts. We considered Jackie Chan's Police Story, which was actually shown at the New York Film Festival back in the mid-'80s, programmed by critic and curator Dave Kerr. There wasn't too much enthusiasm for that here at the office. And then I proposed George Miller's Oscar-winning Mad Max Fury Road, which is about 120 minutes of eye-popping stunts. And one of our board members said to me, please don't do that. So at Max's suggestion, we settled on I think, a unique film that blends the metaphor of the stuntman with lots of the real thing and some still indelible performances. It's a film that actually opened here in New York City 40 years ago this weekend at a theater was called the 57th Street Playhouse at the time. It's now privately run by the Directors Guild of America. Richard Rush's The Stuntman. Max, this traveled a even longer and more circuitous path to the screen than it did to our schedule, I think.
It did, Gary. It was in production in 1978 is when it went before the cameras, and it took a good 2.5 years to reach the cinemas. It was financed independently, even though 20th Century Fox took it out. It was funded, and I know you'll have some stories for us about the funding. And Peter O'Toole, in his DVD commentary for The Stuntman, said the film wasn't released; it escaped.
Well, even the trailer that you put together had an unusual genesis, which you should tell us about before you run it.
Well, yes, I wanted to find us the best quality trailer from The Stuntman to show, and I found a wonderful high-definition trailer for the film, but it had a Spanish narration. So I then found another copy of the trailer that wasn't in good shape, but it had English, and I merged the two together, and whenever you like, I can run this revitalized version.
We may be about to learn something about this because we have a potential donor who has asked us if we can close caption our broadcasts here in the future. So we may have to research that in point of fact. Well, let's roll the trailer.
Sure, coming right up. And so this was the original theatrical trailer for The Stuntman.
Step right up, folks. Ride the ride of the century on Eli's killer crane.
The Stuntman. A man on the run. The woman who had to know why.
Who the hell are you?
And a director who offered him a hiding place.
You should be a stuntman, who is an actor, who is a character in a movie, who is an enemy soldier, who look for you amongst all those.
The Stuntman. In a world where nothing is what it seems, the hardest stunt is to hold on to reality.
It doesn't change the fact that the man is crazy.
It's the insanity of violence.
You're cheating me. You look at me like I'm some kind of damn movie. Well, I'm not. I'm real. I'm on this show. Hang on, baby. We're all free.
in a nightmare, wrapped up in a movie. The Stuntman, an outrageous leap into the unexpected.
And I have to say, I like that line, an outrageous leap into the unexpected. I think it summarizes the film very well and why it can have a very divided audience reaction.
Well, you and I are often taking a dim view of some of these trailers, Max, that we show here. And I think actually, I didn't envy these trailer cutters. This is a tricky picture to sell. I think they did a pretty good job, actually, all things considered.
I think so. And Richard Rush, the director, was quoted that, and I believe this was, it also may have been in the DVD, or it was some interview that he gave, because originally the film was being considered by Columbia Pictures in the early 70s because Rush had made a very successful film for them during a difficult economic time called Getting Straight with Elliot Gould, and I know you can tell us more about that.
Well, interestingly, I came across this week, there was an interview with Richard Rush and Steve Railsback recorded at the University of Southern California in 2016. And Richard Rush, who's now 91, still with us and still out there promoting The Stuntman. And he was telling how Getting Straight, which was one of several campus riot films that were in vogue that year in 1970, I remember it well as a teenager, had been Columbia's biggest grossing film of that year. So he was offered some of the studio's top properties that were then in development, including the novel that The Stuntman is based on. And apparently Francois Truffaut was interested in this novel. Arthur Penn was also interested in it. But as Rush put it, they got that out of their system with their subsequent films. Truffaut when he made Day for Night, which is all about movie making, and Arthur Penn with his Night Moves, which movie stuntmen play a critical role in the plot.
And of course, now I'm kicking myself for not mentioning Night Moves when I talked about movies about the stunts, but that's a great piece. Rush, I know he was quoted as saying, and I imagine he was referring to Columbia Pictures, he said they couldn't figure out if it was a comedy, a drama, if it was a social satire, if it was an action adventure. And of course, the answer was, yes, it's all those things. But that wasn't a satisfactory answer to a studio executive.
No, he claims it was Peter Guber who became a very high-powered, successful producer later on in that decade. But I guess eventually he was able to take the project elsewhere, and he engaged a screenwriter, Larry Marcus, who's actually responsible for a screenplay, I think, for a film that has come to really be recognized as one of the great films of the 60s. And if you haven't seen it, you should. It's not hard to find. Petulia, directed by Richard Lester, starring George C. Scott, Julie Christie, Richard Chamberlain, set in San Francisco in 1968, a beautiful and somewhat dark portrait of both San Francisco and America at that moment in time. It's shot by Nicholas Roeg, beautifully made film. Beautifully written.
Yeah, and then the following year he made, although it was not successful, he wrote an interesting film for George Cukor called Justine.
That's right.
Which hasn't been widely seen.
But unsuccessful, I think we would agree.
Definitely. And the thing with Petulia was very unorthodox in its narrative structure. It was clearly influenced by the French New Wave and Alain Resnais, and it was going back and forth in time and flashing little bits of information at us, and we had to put everything together. How much of that was in the editing? How much of that was in the writing? I can't say without doing the analysis. But The Stuntman has that as well. There's definitely Marcus and Richard Rush are playing with the audience. They're leading us in directions we don't know where we're going. We think it's going in one direction, and we're taken completely to a different area. And I wish we had all the drafts of the script to determine which was Larry Marcus's contribution and which was Richard Rush's, who apparently revised the script, I should say.
Well, there's two or three key parts to the film that we've talked about, and we'll get to them today, that are really kind of like, sort of daringly high wire. And one of them is the first 10 minutes or so of the picture where, you see Peter O'Toole. We don't know if it's him or who he is, but because we see him dropping the apple out of the helicopter, which hits the roof, which starts a whole series of events inside the diner, much of which we see in the trailer. Smartly, they put that in there because you're disoriented at first at who this guy is, where he's going, and eventually we see that what we don't know is has he found sanctuary, or is it a death trap? Because that's, that evolves as the story goes along. But it takes about 10 minutes or so to get your bearings completely.
And there are all kinds of abstractions that are impossible in filmmaking. I mean, we have the big battle scene on the beach near the Del Coronado Hotel. That it's all this carnage from World War I, and we see the soldiers and their dismembered bodies, and it's so shocking to the onlookers. And then suddenly we see it's all a gag. It's all artificial limbs. It's all a special effect. In real life, they would not have just had a battle in such a short time. This would all have been done very piecemeal to get these effects.
That would be the most complex action scene probably ever filmed if they had getting all that.
Oh, absolutely. And the same goes for the big rooftop battle scene that on top of the Hotel del Coronado, which clearly could not have been done in one take. It would have taken days and days to stage all those explosions and all those stunts off the roof. But this is an example of how the stuntman is playing with time and space, and there's a lot of abstractions in the narrative.
And of course, that crane that Peter O'Toole frequently appears on seems to be moving around miraculously from one part of the set to another. Apparently, he was sort of, I guess, an homage and a piercing portrait of his mentor David Lean in this film as well.
I was rather shocked when I found that out, because it's not the most entirely flattering tip of the hat to a director.
No,
but the Eli Cross character. It's the classic portrayal of a manipulative, powerful figure in a film, someone who has to be a lover, an adversary, a manipulator, a friend, a comrade, and an enemy in order to get the vision to the screen, regardless of what the emotional cost is. And for me, and I'd like to hear what your viewing of the film was recently compared to when you first saw it. But in my case, I had remembered most of it, only amazingly enough, the section, because I hadn't seen it in like 4 decades, but the one section I didn't remember was the scene where Eli accidentally screens the rushes or the dailies of the nude attic scene with Barbara Hershey's Nina character and the leading man to Nina's parents. He didn't know they were going to look at that scene. And then he tells her about it right before the camera's set to roll, because he wants a reaction from her. That's the most abusive kind of director behavior towards an actor. I had forgotten that.
Well, I had forgotten that scene too, because we hear stories about that, even like with child actors, where a director says, "Oh, your dog just died" or something, and then they turn the cameras on, and that's
right. Or they shout something terrible, or they make a terrible comment to them right before the camera is about to turn because they want that reaction. Personally, I think a director who knows how to work with actors shouldn't have to resort to that. But it does give us insight into Eli Cross's nature and the kind of character he is.
So Steve Railsback, who plays the young fugitive, had probably his biggest and most significant movie role at that point, and he had attracted some notoriety for playing Charles Manson in a made-for-television. So there's another motif coinciding with the recent movie year, Helter Skelter. It's a made-for-television. After Martin Scorsese and others were approached to play Charles Manson, the role, believe it or not, the role went to Steve Railsback.
I do remember hearing about that Martin Scorsese was approached. Steve Railsback was one of the Elia Kazan discoveries. He co-starred with James Woods in a very little seen film called The Visitors, which I know you've seen, Gary. I never have.
Yes,
and
tough to track down. The only Kazan film I had never seen, so I had to watch it at some point. It's one of his lesser films, but not. You would find it interesting because of James Woods, I think, is in it, one of his first movie roles.
And then we do have Steve Railsback playing, and I remember this absolutely terrifying Charles Manson in that CBS miniseries version of Helter Skelter. And this, unfortunately, was Railsback's last significant film. I mean, he's been working constantly, if you check his filmography, but it's on stuff that's a very low grade kind of exploitation fodder. And clearly he was capable of much better things, especially when you consider, I'm sorry,
in the screening I was mentioning that is on YouTube, I think around 2016, a screening of The Stuntman at the University of Southern California. Richard Rush and Steve Railsback on stage, and clearly Railsback feels this was the best thing that he ever did. You know, thanks to Richard Rush, the best part he ever had.
What was your emotional reaction seeing it for the first time since you saw it when it came out?
Well, I remember that was a very, we were talking about that before we went on the air, and we're going to try to cover that either in our blog or on this program. That fourth quarter of 1980, when this film came out, there were many significant movies and, of course, many significant events in American life. It was a very dramatic quarter of the year. So I certainly the high points of the film I remembered very well, and the high wire aspect of the film, when it's working. I don't think it always works, but I think that, particularly O'Toole's performance, the spectacular scenes on the rooftop of the Hotel Coronado. Barbara Hershey, I've always admired and felt she was, one of the most beautiful and intelligent actresses of her generation. It's always great to see her. I think, it's one of those things where you remember both the best parts and maybe the parts that, may work or may not work, as we'll get to.
And I had not seen the whole film in 4 decades. I had pulled a certain scene that we're going to talk about for a class I was doing on screenwriting, but I hadn't seen the whole thing front to end until the past week. And my reaction was identical to what it was originally. I mean, I remember loving the performances, loving O'Toole, loving Barbara Hershey, admiring Steve Railsback and Alan Gurwitz / Garfield and the others.
Great supporting cast, which we'll enumerate later.
Great supporting cast. I remember finding the screenplay very inspired in a lot of the risks it took in terms of these red herrings and very abrupt changes in mood and abstractions. I remember not liking the direction then, and I had strong issues with the direction now, thinking it was very sledgehammer and heavy-handed, and it seemed to be a carryover from Richard Rush's drive-in movie, Hell's Angels, motorcycle films days.
That's how it got started, or a film called Psych Out, which was supposedly about the Haight-Ashbury scene in 1967, in which Dean Jagger utters the immortal line, "Man, it's all just one big plastic hassle."
And Henry Jaglom, I think, has an acid trip on in this character in the film, and then he made Hell's Angels on Wheels. So I felt that Rush was kind of carrying over his drive-in movie technique to a film that I think needed more of a Jonathan Demme touch, And I didn't like the photography then, and I didn't like it now. And I consider it one of the best American films of the late 70s. I think it's an outstanding film, despite these drawbacks that I have.
In spite of itself, unusual but true. And of course, Peter O'Toole could do no wrong for me at that point, mainly because of Lawrence of Arabia and The Ruling Class. And he happened to be, the picture had 3 Oscar nominations, his performance, of course, the screenplay, and director Richard Rush, believe it or not, and what was a very strong year for auteur film direction. And O'Toole had the misfortune to be nominated the same year with a series of other terrific Best Actor performances. Robert Duvall for The Great Santini, John Hurt for The Elephant Man, of course Robert De Niro for Raging Bull, and we know who won that. But still, he had nothing to be ashamed of.
And he had come out of a very difficult time, as someone was pointing out to us before we started. I mean, he had a serious cancer scare, and he had made some very unfortunate films like Caligula, where he fortunately was killed off in the first reel.
As he said, Mr. Guccione said to him, would he mind improvising his performance as Tiberius? And he apparently did that because there was no screenplay. And he said later in an interview, well, he's not bad, my Tiberius. He's dead in the first reel, isn't he? So that's he got away with that.
This was a bit of a comeback for Peter O'Toole, and it afforded the actors a lot of risks, a lot of. I mean, I imagine they would have been very invigorated by some of the challenges and the scene that stood out for me then. And it stands out for me now. And this comes about an hour and 38 minutes into the film. It's like a 9-minute scene.
The high wire scene in the picture.
Yeah, it's the high wire
scene, as I've always called it.
The paint can scene, exactly, and it starts with Barbara Hershey's Nina asking Steve Railsback, "Who are you?" And he begins this monologue that we think is going to be this really intensely depressing, violent monologue about he's returning from Nam, and he's found that his wife has been having an affair with another man, and our assumption is, oh, he killed this man and that's why the police want him. But as he's telling the narrative, it gets more and more ridiculous about, it's an ice cream parlor and he's grabbing tubs of ice cream and slipping on the ice cream, and the man falls and fractures something, and Railsback feels very bad about that. And by the end of the scene, it's become this total lunacy, this slapstick monologue. And how often do we see that in a commercial screenplay? Almost never.
Well, it's the kind of scene I'm sure that some studio executive at Fox, took a look at and said, this is stopping the picture cold here. We want to see what happens to this guy. Where's the climax? And unfortunately, the studio Fox was in kind of a state of transition at that point, which I think probably was part of the reason that the film had a very long journey from production to release, almost 3 years from when it started shooting in January of 1978 at the Hotel Coronado.
And it was funded by this, was it a shopping mall developer?
An Indianapolis shopping mall magnate named Melvin Simon. We see his name prominently displayed at the beginning of the film. Melvin Simon Presents.
And let's just say, having been a casualty of a lot of his productions when I had to review films in Milwaukee in the early 80s, like Choo Choo and the Philly Flash and Porky's and things like that, this definitely is a standout for Melvin Simon. But I think the fact that the money came independently afforded Richard Rush more artistic freedom than he would have had all the money come from 20th Century Fox. And I also believe that the film was a couple of years early. Had it come out perhaps in 82 or 83, when the studios were starting to open their classics division and giving chances to unusual films for a short while, as home video was about to emerge, maybe The Stuntman would have found a bigger audience and might have fit in a little better.
Right, even Fox started their own classics division, as you may recall, with Paul Bartel's Eating Raoul, which
yes,
Stuntman would have fit in more comfortably with that release schedule.
And it was the only really profitable division in 20th Century Fox at the time. Barry Diller took over as chairman. So what did he do? He closed it down. But don't get me started on that.
Wow. Well, again, that also the wonderful supporting cast that is woven through the film. A man named Chuck Bale, who's a stuntman in his own right, apparently a very accomplished one, directed a couple films as well. He becomes Steve Railsback's kind of mentor and confidant, and is always joking with him about the weight of his testicles and so forth throughout the film.
And I do love that sequence when the Chuck Bale's his character is training Steve Railsback on the roof of the Del Coronado Hotel, because it's one of those sequences that I suspect was a result of the written word, where they filmed it the way it was written, because we're joining them at different points in Chuck Bale's narrative, where he's giving Railsback's characters these random comments about stunts and philosophy, and we cut to Railsback hanging from the storm drain, and I have a sneaking suspicion that was the way it was written originally, as opposed to how they just edited it.
But it was also, cut sort of almost like kind of Nouvelle Vague style or something, and it's in a surprisingly effective way. I think that's definitely one of the best scenes in the picture.
And Alan Gurwitz / Garfield, who had
sadly left us this year.
Wonderful, wonderful character actor from the 70s in films like The Conversation from Coppola and others.
Nashville.
And he had his moment he had a number of fine moments as the poor screenwriter who's trying to satisfy Eli Cross. And I think that his standout scene is the one where he's trying to scold Railsback for turning Nita away, and the fact that she wasn't virginal. And he said, I had a virgin once. I had to go all the way to Guatemala for her.
Right. That strange scene where all three of them are in the hotel room there, which for reasons.
Like, what was that about? I know.
Clear. No, that's...
Precisely. And there are some technical points to consider for this film. In the Duesenberg, when they're going off the bridge, there's a small camera, an IMO camera, which is a hand-wound 35 millimeter camera that originally would have been used for combat photography in World War II. By the time this film would have been made, it was often used for stunt photography. It's known as a crash camera. Literally, you put it in the side of a road before two cars smash into each other, and the camera is running automatically so that no camera operator gets injured. And so here they have attached it to the camera, but it only has about a minute's worth of film.
Right. I think you mentioned that you've actually picked up and handled one of these cameras. There's about 100 feet of 35 millimeter film in the magazine, which there's 90 feet of 35 mil per minute, so it's a little over a minute of film. So we know now why Peter O'Toole almost decapitates the assistant cameraman there for yelling "cut" in that hilarious scene. And the cameraman, the assistant says, "Oh, there's only 33 feet of film left in the magazine." Well, O'Toole probably started out, using one of those cameras, and he knows that every foot counts.
Because obviously this is the pre-high definition video days of production, where if there's film in the camera and the camera jams, that's a disaster, especially if you're dealing with explosions and pyrotechnics and stunt work, and that's when directors go insane and ballistic.
Oh, there's a famous story about that. The great Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky, his last film called The Sacrifice, the climax of this film, a house was set on fire and burned down on the coast of Sweden. And the great cinematographer Sven Nykvist was shooting this house bursting into flames and completely engulfed in flames. And suddenly the magazine jammed in the camera, and they had to rebuild the house and shoot the scene all over again. And there's many stories like that, I'm sure.
And this is why you have characters like Eli Cross, who brilliant but psychologically unstable, because they have to deal with these kinds of things. What were your thoughts on Eli Cross? Because I think that the film is trying to convey that the Peter O'Toole character, he's a mad genius. I mean, he's impossible, but he has a vision, and he clearly is talking about, he wants to make an anti-war statement, and he wants this to be something different and something unexpected. From the movie within a movie, I didn't get that. I didn't see the genius. And I think maybe this is a shortcoming of the director, Richard Rush, who wasn't able to create a more powerful movie within a movie that was equivalent to the Eli Roth character's vision.
Yeah,
the theory.
I think this is one of those questions that we're always going to be wondering about. Certainly, you had an excellent screenwriter there who could perhaps have crafted some suggestion of a little bit more quality to the scenes that we see being shot. There's almost, speaking of Caligula, there's almost like a penthouse style orgy going on or something there in one scene. And Barbara Hershey at a grave site, which is, John Ford on a bad day or something there, and so forth. So it almost seems like the maniacal determination of O'Toole to get what he sees is the right shot or whatever, it really matters, rather than the content itself.
Definitely, and when the film came out, it was a lot of people maybe have forgotten that when this film was released, it was major critical acclaim. I mean, it was huge critical acclaim. It didn't do that fantastically at the box office here, but it got major critical reviews, and Pauline Kael reviewed it in the New Yorker and gave it a rave. And she liked the fact that the Eli Cross character of Peter O'Toole had a bit more depth than maybe Truffaut's more saintly director in Day for Night. But Day for Night was really a more joyous look at filmmaking, whereas The Stuntman is more in the tradition of Hollywood movies about the nightmares of filmmaking. You very rarely see a Hollywood movie celebrating the joy of filmmaking.
Right, and I think another thought that occurred to me about this, quality of what they're shooting. It almost seems at times like O'Toole has acquired some kind of bizarre paternalistic fascination for the Steve Railback character that almost transcends some of the other things he's doing, while the cameras are rolling, and that's an added bit of sort of mystery and obviously concern for the Railback character, I think, as well.
Well, and then eventually, and especially when he's starting to suspect that Peter O'Toole's Eli Cross wants to kill him. Wants him to die in the stunt, and then it becomes a suspense piece when in fact it's actually more of a rite of passage that almost has an upbeat conclusion. Once
Right.
again, leading us in a different direction.
And so many things fueling the young man's paranoia when the maniacal cop was watching the set, played by Alex Rocco, whom many of us remember from his demise in The Godfather. And Steve Railsback's character is Cameron, although we have not heard his name said until the earliest parts of the picture. And he sees the camera light going on, the police officer, and he says, is that camera on? And Steve Railsback thinks, is that camera? Meaning that the cop, so he immediately guns the engine and takes off, thinking that he's about to be arrested.
Alex Rocco, he played Mo Green, of course, who was
Right.
famously shot in the eye in The
Yes.
Godfather. And as much as I criticize the cinematography, the cameraman, or the director of photography, Mario Tosi, had photographed a very interesting film about movie making in 1975 called Hearts of the West,
The West,
about
right.
low-budget westerns being made in Los Angeles in the 1970s. I'm sorry, in the 1930s, forgive me. And I thought I liked the look of that better than I liked the look that was the stuntman had.
Alan Arkin as a memorably maniacal Poverty Row studio executive.
Once again, another very cynical take on the movie business and filmmaking. And one of the British reviews of the stuntman regards the Peter O'Toole character, and I have it here somewhere, as a Jupiter-like figure, a Jupiter-like character. So the image of director as God or the devil gradually, descending on the scene, and so that's kind of the crane kind of contributes to that symbolism, I think.
Well, I think that Richard Rush himself, he made a couple more films after this, nothing of any significance. But I think my sense is that this movie, and perhaps from this recent interview, is still kind of like, the white whale of his movie career. That he was proud of it, and he may have been frustrated by its distribution. He may not have made a lot of money from it. 20 years after the stuntman biz trip, and among hundreds of films being screened, one particular day I saw something playing in a small theater called The Sinister Saga of the Making of the Stuntman, which apparently Richard Rush had put together, and he was hosting the screening. So I went to the screening, and the theater was full of other, American and other film buffs and festival programmers, and here was Richard Rush having put together this kind of home movie quality, and apologizing for it being on video, since that was not a ubiquitous format in the year 2000, about the history of the stuntman. He claimed financial chicanery and disasters on the set, and he was trying to get the rights back to the film from the supermarket magnate 20 years after its release. And I don't know if he was ever successful at that, or who does own it now. There's no studio logo on the version that we saw today, but it's kind of poignant and showing, almost kind of an Eli Cross-like obsession of his own, continuing to follow this film through the decades, and he's still with us.
I mean, so many people want to be film directors, and if they knew what film directors had to go through, they would probably change their minds, because Richard Rush, apparently, he spent at least 9 years trying to get the film made, or 8 years. And this is a common story of major directors with passion projects. They, and Scorsese and Oliver Stone, they all have stories to tell where it takes them a decade, or sometimes more than that, to get a project made. In this case, the Brodeur novel from 1970 that the stuntman was based on. And it leads to neuroses and depression and anxiety. And you can see where directors can be a bit of a mess when you consider the battles they have to do to bring the movie to be made. But as you're pointing out, getting the funding is just the beginning. Then there's all this other politicking behind the screen between funders and studios and distributors and so forth.
Yep.
And unfortunately, after the stuntman, believe it or not, it was about 14 years before another Richard Rush movie came along. It was the Color of Night with Bruce Willis, which I think you have a story about a con event.
Well, ironically, that film he also brought to the Cannes Film Festival several years before the screening I was just talking about, and he screened it, outside the regular programs of the festival, and apparently was not well received. And there was a press conference where Bruce Willis was asked some very pointed questions by certain foreign press, and he shot back, very vituperatively on his own. And it was a very unhappy event, and probably the last thing that the producers wanted in terms of the international premiere of that particular film, which, can show you how things, as we see in The Stuntman, do not always go well in the movie world.
Yeah, it's a tough business, and I remember at the time the Stuntman came out, I believe he was interviewed in American Film Magazine about the saga of getting it made, and they were asking about next projects, and he was saying, "Yeah, I've only made 3 movies in 10 years. I have to do more work," but unfortunately, it was a very long time before he got to make another feature. And I also remember a year after the Stuntman came out, ABC had a documentary. It was the fall of '81 called Hooray for Hollywood. It was produced by, I think, Pam Hill's division at the time at ABC. And they interviewed Richard Rush. I want to say he was with Peter O'Toole in the interview. Maybe, I think they were together. But I remember the caption under them was, The Stuntman, critically acclaimed commercial failure. Because they were talking about the problems of having a movie that get all these accolades but wasn't getting a financial return.
Well, before we go to our questions, a question is, we'll remember to push the participant button and check the box over on the right-hand side. But Max, what are some of your other favorite Peter O'Toole performances, or ones that perhaps are a little underappreciated?
Well, certainly he was very well appreciated in My Favorite Year, whereas playing Alan Swan, the faded movie idol who has a guest slot on 1950s TV. Lawrence of Arabia, of course, is a towering achievement for everyone connected with it. And I'm trying to remember, because after Arabia, well, we kind of see him going Hollywood.
Well, I think Beckett, that holds up very well. I think
that holds up well. Yes.
Lord Jim, an extremely ambitious, even filmed on location in Cambodia by director Richard Brooks in the mid-'60s, but unsuccessful Joseph Conrad adaptation.
Oh, Lord Jim, but yes, that is a very, very well done film, and certainly one of the stronger pictures he made after Lawrence of Arabia. Absolutely. And the actors, title sequence was prepared by Dan Perry Production Company. Dan Perry was a major title designer in the 1970s. He did Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, and other films.
Two classics.
And
two classic title designs, too.
Exactly. And I know Sean will probably tell us more about this at some point. But New Plaza and the Museum of Art and Design are going to be co-presenting a talk I'll be doing on the art of title design later this year. And we're going to talk about Dan Perry. The Stuntman was a good teaser.
Everybody loves to see those because it's tailor-made for the big screen. Well, let's see if there's any questioners out there.
We have a number of hands raised, and they've been raised for a while. So I'm curious as to the burning questions. So first hand up belongs to Joan. So Joan, if you can unmute yourself.
Right.
And start your video.
Let's see, I don't know if my video is working again.
We see you. We hear you.
There you go, John.
Thank you. I must have been watching it from a different planet.
We all were. You weren't the only one.
I really couldn't stand the movie at all. I normally love Peter O'Toole and Barbara Hershey. I just didn't care about anybody in it, no matter what they were trying to do. I just didn't like the characters. I wondered how faithful it was, if at all, to the book, because it just left me completely cold. I just didn't have any interest in any of them. Period.
It's not a likable. These are not likable characters, and the movie does everything I think it can to alienate us in a way. And your reaction, I think, is common. For some people.
Succeeded with me, I'm afraid. I mean, I loved your talk about it, but I just absolutely disliked it.
We were trying to find out a little more about the novel and the author. The only thing I could dig up is that he was born in Massachusetts in the early 30s, and it seemed to have been his only novel. There's not much of a trail there.
And I haven't read the novel, but it's It's a tough one. I have to say that there I could see it can be very alienating to an audience, and especially if we don't like the directions we're being taken in. So it's everyone has different reactions, but that's good actually. It makes it more interesting.
I enjoyed your talk about it, but
No, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your thoughts, John.
No doubt. Thanks, Joan. Sheila K., you're the next person up. Would you please start your video? Sheila?
I can't get the video. Is it
Oh, we
on?
can hear you though. Oh, there we see you. Hello.
Okay. I just want to say that I've seen all the other movies in this series that you've presented, and I liked all of them, but I really couldn't stand this movie. I thought that Peter O'Toole was just wooden, and the actor who played the fugitive, he just seemed like an idiot to me. And I was really surprised at it, and I was looking forward to listening to this afternoon to see why you and your co-presenter were so enthusiastic about it. But I just wonder if there's another movie that shows you a lot of stunts where the story is a little better, because I really had to force myself to the end of this movie.
We'd like
go ahead,
to hear about that. We'd like to hear some recommendations, because this, as I said, this was an unusual kind of process for us, and that there didn't appear to be a lot of films like this. And I think in some ways this film is unique, despite what one may think of it on very legitimate levels. But if there are other contenders, we want to hear from you.
Well, and also I think a couple of things is it deals with the movie making process, which I think gives us a connection to it here at New Plaza. And also, this got major reviews in 1980, 81.
Yeah.
It was a major critical favorite.
Pauline Kael loves it, or loved it.
And Roger Ebert was a fan, and others. And I'm reminded of a story. A friend of mine went to the New York Film Festival in 1969. He saw a Luchino Visconti movie called The Damned. And he said to somebody, I hated the direction, the acting, the photography, and the editing, and the performances, and I think it's the best film of the year. And it's like about The Stuntman, I didn't care for the direction or the photography, and I had issues, many of the issues you expressed, and for some reason, I remember the fact that I remember so much of the film 40 years later, when there are so many films from recent years that I see them and I forget them. I think that accounts for something. So to me, there's something about it that I think has a power.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that. And some things don't work either. And the picture's probably too long at 2 hours and 10 minutes. I see somebody referring to, fast forwarding when they were watching it. That we can't do that, of course. We wouldn't be doing our job.
No, exactly. But then we appreciate all views. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Marjorie, you're next. Would you please unmute yourself and start your video? There you go.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to say I agree and disagree with all of the comments that have been made here. So that's where I stand on this movie. But I did marvel at the performances of Peter O'Toole and of Railsback. And I did look him up, and it was surprising that he did nothing of significance afterwards. I had a problem. Peter O'Toole's character is clearly defined. He is a real megalomaniac. He will do anything to get the film made. I think my favorite line was he's ordering the clouds not to pass before the sun, before the scene is over, which just, to me, said it all. But I had a problem defining Railsback's character, of like where he comes from. Was he in shell shock? Was he paranoid? Was he this?
All of the above, Marjorie, I think.
Probably, yes.
Exactly. And it comes in that scene we talked about, what Gary described as the paint can scene. That, like, who is this man? We're trying to get a hand, and it's almost as though they're deliberately making it difficult for us to understand this character. Is he a sadist? Is he a buffoon? Is he a well-meaning lug who just lucked out in love? everything in that scene seems to question our understanding of his character.
Yeah, no, I agree. One more thing, I just loved how they showed the makeup. Barbara Hershey at the beginning ripping off that old lady's face was just wonderful.
Yes.
Really wonderful.
And that's another case where they're playing with us as well, where
Yes.
one of
This
her
is
first
great.
appearances.
Right.
Thank you.
Chuck Bale, the stunt man, tearing off a cut on Steve Railsback's cheek, which you would have thought when you saw. Well, of course he cut his cheek, falling through the glass and so forth. But
we're getting the rifle butt in his face and so forth. It's all the playing with time and space. Yeah.
Oh, one more thing. When you're talking about one of Peter O'Toole's greats, Beckett.
Yes.
Yes. I just thought that was absolutely fantastic.
Great
Okay,
one.
thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. So we have about 5 more hands up. I want to remind everybody, if you do want to ask a question, please hit the participant button and raise your hand. And Lee, you're up next. Would you please unmute yourself and start your video?
Okay, guys, here I am back again.
Hey, Lee.
Okay, I'm going to agree with everything that was negative that was said about it. It also gave me the opportunity to take a few brief naps along the way. One of the friends who was watching it with me said, I'm not watching this anymore, left her glass of wine and walked out on my apartment. And another friend said, I'm never going to get this 2 hours back. I mean, why am I watching this? So I have a feeling that a lot of maybe women felt this way about this movie. But because it's related to Lincoln Plaza, my feeling always is I used to go to Lincoln Plaza when I had nothing else to do, and it was a miserable day. And I didn't always see a great movie, Sometimes they're not all great. And as my English professor used to say, you should see things that are no good and you don't like, because then you can define better what you do like. So
Absolutely.
that's that.
And I'm a great believer in just giving all kinds of movies a chance, because you may be pleasantly surprised by something.
Right.
And
but
go ahead,
Gary.
Well, as I think someone once said to me, if you don't have a film in your schedule or your program that ticks a few people off, you're not doing your job.
You can't fool all the people all the time. My boss used to say, if everybody's equally unhappy, I did a good job. But my big problem with this movie was when I woke up from my naps, I didn't quite know what was movie within a movie and what was movie, mostly because Barbara Hershey was always wearing the same makeup. Or she was in the same costume. So it was hard to decipher what was movie within a movie, like the bedroom scene, even the scene at the end scene where they're in the paint. I couldn't tell if that was movie or movie within a movie. So that was one of my big problems.
And that was clearly intentional. I think we were supposed to be confused by the film.
Then I guess you did a good job.
We were supposed to be wondering, is this real? Is this not real? And I remember the first time I saw the film, at the end, when the car goes down and Steve Railsback emerges, and then he sees Barbara Hershey on the other side of that little swampy area, I thought, is she an apparition? Is he imagining this, or is she really there? And maybe that was not intentional on that part, but I think in general, we were supposed to question what is reality and what isn't. And we don't see that as very often, at least at that time in narrative films in this country.
I think with that scene, there was a lot of sneaky stuff going on offset to put it where the director wanted it to be.
The real director.
Yeah, like how did she get out of the car? I mean, come on.
Oh, there's some narrative plot holes that were being filled.
He's been instructed on how to get out of the car, I believe, by the head stuntman. He said, roll down that window and you're going to slip out of there like a minnow. Now whether that was really physically as easy to do, I wondered. But
yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
As always.
Thanks, Lee. We have 5 more hands up. Curiously enough, all but one are female. So
we're ready. We're ready.
We're ready. Let's see what happens. Diana, would you please start your video?
Hello.
Good.
I have nothing to add to what's been said because everything I wanted to say has been said, with the exception of the fact that I'm stunned that Steve Railsback never made it as a result of this movie. I mean, I expected that there would be really a whole bunch of things that happened after this, because certainly is talented, and I certainly like the performances and the stunts. It's such a tiresome movie.
It's such a what?
Tiresome.
Well, you know, yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Because of all the things that have been said, like, is it this or is it that? You know, is Peter O'Toole paternalistic, or is he exploitive? Is he going to help this guy who's a fugitive, or is he going to kill him? I guess I like stuff to be a little bit more cut and dried. I just was really irritated by it. So I didn't want to go to sleep, Lee, but I certainly did want it to hurry up and end. So
there's a lot of irritating things about the stuntman. I agree, and
Now, Diana, were you living in England when the picture was released, or were you here?
No, I was here, but I didn't see it.
Curious whether it had any kind of life in the UK at all. I guess we'd have to research that.
It's definitely open there.
Yeah,
definitely open in the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
All right, thanks, Diana. So we have Marianne, who may have a different opinion. Let's ask Marianne to get started. And
yes, I love the movie.
Yeah.
I looked it, and it was like a detective story for me. You know, just trying to understand what was going on, etc. So I thought it was a wonderful movie. I love the actors. I did not understand everything, and maybe you have an idea at the end when he wants his money. You know, completely at the end when Steve asked Peter O'Toole, "I want $1,000." How does it finish, and what was the reason why there was this discussion?
So Eli Cross was offering him 600,
Yeah.
and Steve Railsback wanted 1,000. What would you add to that, Gary?
Well, I got the impression maybe that he had been verbally promised more than the usual $600 fee, and felt that they had agreed on 1,000 because it was a little more of a dangerous stunt. I think to me this kind of ends the movie on a bit of sort of comic relief, and we never find out, of course, exactly what he gets paid, but it's a little bit of a kind of comic tonic end to things rather than.
And there's also that nonsensical / surrealistic / comic element of the helicopter spraying the pink dust smoke over the scene as Eli Cross is flying away for the last time. It's adding to the absurdity of the moment.
But
Indeed.
you know, it's like the Charleston when he is dancing the Charleston on the plane. I think for me, I thought it was a wonderful movie. So I'm really happy that you selected it for us to see, really.
I think it was very admired in France as well, Marianne, when in its release there.
Yeah.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marianne. So Ann Potter, would you please start your video?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hello from San Diego.
Nice.
So I did have some concerns about the Hotel Del after watching this movie. It's like, how did they put that thing back together? I thought it was an incredible movie. I did suffer some whiplash between the absurdity, the sadness, the PTSD that Railsback suffered. I thought O'Toole's performance was unbelievably maniacal. And when Railsback went off the bridge with what I thought Nina in the trunk, and then came up from underwater and saw her, I was infuriated. I mean, I was so concerned for her in that whole scene. And then he comes up and he sees her with the director. I was infuriated. So I think that argument about the fee that he actually earned encapsulated my fury with the whole thing. But I so appreciate these comments and the reminder about the pink fairy dust. that got sprayed all over that movie at the end it was astonishing. I don't think I'll ever forget this movie.
Well,
So
fairy dust. That's a great description.
That's a great analogy.
Which of course that's the director's role, to scatter the fairy dust, right?
And he did, right? It was, I never seen anything like it, and I truly appreciate being introduced to it. So,
and the Coronado is still alive and well, as far as we know, right?
yes, it is. Yes, it's just actually been refurbished. It's quite beautiful these days. So, I'm not sure a director would have any luck filming explosions there in the next little while.
And thank you. And the Del Coronado, of course, the movie lovers, is also famous for being used for Some Like It Hot. That's the hotel where the women's orchestra goes to in Florida to perform. But it's wonderful having San Diego present today. Thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. So our next to last questioner is Jean. And then Craig, you're going to wrap it up for us. So Jean, would you please?
Okay.
Ready to go.
Hi. I kind of agree with a lot of the negativity. So it's been talked a lot. Although I think that the story itself was a great idea, start to finish. And maybe if it was remade in different hands, different actors, it really could work. I thought Peter O'Toole was a bit cliched, he was almost annoying, and he's supposed to be a good actor. And Steve Railsback, I don't think cut the mustard at all. I just didn't care for his look, and et cetera, et cetera. So that said, I have to tell you, something really bizarre started here as I was watching you start to speak, because we have CBS on right now. My husband's also watching a football game. And as you guys began to speak, a commercial came on for Acura, a car commercial. And the first image is Harold Lloyd hanging on to that clock.
Oh, my word.
And then through the magic of everything, he supposedly falls, but an actor in an Acura car kind of falls in through the hole in the roof of the car and starts driving it. And then he's going on this whole crazy scene where they intercut all of those films that you showed us the other day.
I'm getting chills as you're telling me this.
Yeah, it's unbelievable as you two were talking. And there's the trains coming at the guy, and there's a heroine, attached to the tracks, and they intercut all of the stunts of those early years as you were speaking. Long stunt men and women.
Well, I'm going to look for that commercial, because maybe I'll incorporate it at some point. But that's powerful.
It's right up your alley. It really was. So anyway, I enjoy you guys, and my husband and I kind of stumbled upon you all during this COVID thing, and we just adore you all, and as well as all the people who get on, we feel like we know you, or you're all our buddies on the Upper West Side or something, and it's just been a delight. So
that is great. That really makes our day.
It really does, and we're thrilled to have you both.
Thank you, and
our mad tea party.
Yeah, everyone who watches, we get a kick out of all of you. You're all wonderful people, so keep at it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jean. Our last questioner is Craig. Craig, I just lost you. Give me 1 second. I apologize.
I see Craig.
Good. Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
First warning is that Steve Railsback is my uncle.
Wow.
So I'm not in the least bit objective about this film. I'm an absolute nut fan over the film. And I'm actually, I don't know if you guys have any interest later on talking about this, but I'm making a documentary on Richard Rush.
Yes.
So I actually have I probably have a lot of answers to some of the questions you guys were talking about, but this might not be the right forum to talk about it, but I've spent a lot of time with Richard over the last few years.
Gary and I would love to chat with you. If I speak for Gary, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I do have a question in terms of Richard kind of kicked off the new Hollywood movement in 1960 with his first film, Too Soon to Love.
Yep.
And I wonder, in my mind, he's kind of the bookend of the end, maybe the end of New Hollywood as a movement. Would you guys put him in that category, or where would you put the stuntman in terms of New Hollywood films?
Forgive me, I've just had a moment of brilliance here. Isn't it interesting, isn't it powerful that the stuntman came out right before Heaven's Gate? Heaven's Gate was seen as the beginning of the end of the director era in the New Hollywood, or the Hollywood where the director had more of a voice. And I don't, maybe Gary could add to that, but I thought that's pretty powerful, because you're right. Rush is coming out of that era where directors are given a little bit more chance to express their artistic views. And after Heaven's Gate, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Well, I think that was a watershed, Heaven's Gate. Although I think the story of Heaven's Gate is much more complex, and I don't imagine it's a film we're going to show on this program because of its length and other reasons. But I would still urge people to seek it out, because I think there's a lot of amazing things in Heaven's Gate as well, and then maybe other things that you may not be thrilled with about it, but it's definitely worth seeing once. But I think after that, still chronologically, there were other very ambitious films. Warren Beatty's Reds, Francis Coppola's One from the Heart, Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. You know, it wasn't dead stop at the end of 1980. But I think spiritually, you could say yes. That's why I mentioned, you know, in the program, and I may do a blog piece about this. That fourth quarter of 1980 was a watershed in many different ways in American life and culture, and these movies were right in the middle of it.
Well, and they definitely, I mean, we tend to look at the 70s as the great decade of you know, Hollywood directors, and I kind of see the stuntman as the last of the great 70 films, the great films of the 70s.
It certainly is that last gasp. Raging Bull is riding that wave a little bit. It came out around that time, but it's definitely in that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, Raging Bull and even Heaven's Gate in some ways are works of aspiring to a certain level of classicism, maybe on an epic scale, whereas the stuntman is much more, as we say, a high wire act, both in the screenplay and the, you know, and the direction.
Well, thanks for doing this, guys. I really enjoyed the negative comments were a little painful for me, but they hurt my heart just a little bit, but I won't tell Richard or Steve.
Well,
all great movies can be divide an audience. You know, you don't want a uniform response to everything.
No, that's true. That's true.
Sign if it can arouse that much anger as much as joy, I think that's a good sign for a film.
But I would also point out Steve did do Life Force.
Well,
and
Life Force still gets shown occasionally. It has some fans.
It's got a life. It's got a life of its own, and I don't know if you ever saw him in what was the Chris Carter, the X-Files. He's got 2 episodes of X-Files where he plays Dwayne Barry, an alien abductee. He's absolutely fantastic in those episodes. If you haven't seen,
sounds like good casting. Good casting.
Really fun. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Craig.
I don't know how to contact you guys. Maybe we might chat later if you guys are interested. But
sure, I guess you can start.
Craig, go ahead. Craig, you registered with your email when you signed up?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get back to you then.
Perfect.
Okay, great. I'd love to chat with you guys.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, we had Burt Lancaster's niece, and now we had Steve Railsback's nephew on the program here.
That's great stuff.
So that's the last question, Gary and Max. So,
okay, well, I think that we've seen one type of stunt work here today, and lots of discussion about it, pro and con. For our next film, we're going to see another spectacular example of both, I think, physical and emotional grace, a film that I'm sure many of you know and love, Michael Powell and Emmett Pressburger's The Red Shoes. And Sean is going to tell us a little more about that and some other stuff that's going on.
Hi, everyone. Always fun. Craig, I'm just going to say I am one of those that's a huge fan of this movie, so I love it. And I'm really glad we had the opportunity to have all the discussion about it. I love all the diverse opinions about it too, because it really makes you think about the movie, and I love that too. So we do have a lecture coming up on, sorry you guys, I'm looking at my calendar right now. It is October 28th, excuse me. We're doing a lecture on Powell and Pressburger, great film duo that actually created the Red Shoes. And so we're going to watch the Red Shoes, have a discussion about the Red Shoes on November 1st. So our next pairing is Powell and Pressburger lecture series, and then the Red Shoes for our discussion. And I think, as always, it will be a lot of fun, and we hope to see you. And thanks for joining us again. Thanks for the lively discussion and diverse opinions. We love it.